Hi, this is Cassie with MyCounselor.Online, and today I have Jesse Masson with me to talk over his recent article about how to control your anxious thoughts. Jesse, thanks for meeting with me today.
You bet, Cassie. Thanks for talking with me. This is great.
Yeah, I love this article because we all deal with anxiety. There is always something or other in our lives, some more than others, some subjects more than others, but anxiety is just something that we are all familiar with. And so it was great to hear the practical behind it, and also the deeper emotional side behind the anxiety. And that's what I want to start with, talking about the emotions behind anxiety, because it's not just like, let's check off a checklist and get this done with so that we can move on, but talk about the emotions behind anxiety, what anxiety presenting means.
Well, that's a pretty big question, but I think there can be, in all fairness and in short, Cassie, there can be a lot of what I find emotions that can kind of lead to our anxious thinking or our state of anxiety.
Okay.
Anxiety just simply isn't, it's not a very easily perceived situation where we say, oh, the situation A is happening, therefore I'm going to be emoting anxiety.
Okay.
It's usually clouded and entangled amongst other things going on that we don't realize.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's more compounded as far as more emotions involved. But what we see is just the surface level of anxiety, and that's what really catches our attention. And
Yeah.
it can be more of like the symptoms. We realize something's going on when we have a nosebleed, when a nosebleed just starts, as opposed to, before that we would never know to think about, the condition of the biomedical condition of our nostrils or anything else.
Just like we're not thinking about the emotional condition of our heart until all of a sudden we realize I'm feeling super anxious or stressed, or whatever verbiage we put.
Sure.
So very interesting. I imagine that could be challenging to walk through, but gives opportunity to dig in a little bit more to what's actually going on, and therefore maybe be able to prevent it in the future instead of reacting to it.
Right.
Goal.
Yeah, and one thing with that is really, in an article, try and touch on a couple of different things, and one is just realizing the emotional backdrop to the presenting feeling of anxiety, and as well as being aware of what practical steps can be done, because sometimes the word that comes to mind is just things seem overwhelming when we're caught in an anxious feeling or anxious moment. It just seems like I'm stuck. And one word analogy and illustration that I use a lot with clients is, it seems to resonate, is it's like getting your car stuck in mud, and you just, you're stuck, and this isn't a good situation, and so you want to do something about it. And so when you try, you realize all you're doing is just spinning your wheels in mud, and it just seems like you're getting nowhere because you're not. But that seems confusing because you're trying to do the right thing.
You're working so hard to get nowhere.
Yeah, that's right. So that's really just where we're at with anxiety. But even further in the article, a good point of reflection is realizing that emotions, like any emotion, anxiety is really just like a signal or a flare that allows us to be tuned in to say, oh, something amiss is going on here.
Yeah.
When I'm experiencing anxiety, it's not so much like, wow, I'm overwhelmed and I'm going to be just overtaken. It's perceived that way sometimes. It feels that way.
Feels that way.
But really, what's kind of the anxiety that's going on is just a signal that says, man, something is out of whack here. There's either deeper emotions going on that I'm wrestling with around a situation, or it could be simply, man, I'm feeling overwhelmed because I am in realization of tasks that are going on.
Yeah.
It can be one of two ways, but in counseling, it's usually tied to emotions.
Which makes sense. I think even like thinking about that, sometimes when I don't get a good night's sleep, just as a mom, I have a lot of little kids and everything feels, it could just be even as basic as general self-care. I mean, self-care, trying to get a lot of sleep as a mom is a challenging
Yeah.
wrestle. But that, just in the basic taking care of our biological needs as well comes to mind when you're talking about that. And one of the first things that you talk about, your very first thing, is go to prayer. And why do you suggest that right away? What do you feel like? How does prayer affect anxiety?
From a Christian standpoint, as a Christian, that's always going to be a filter I use just in everyday life. I don't mean to be so whimsical with that to suggest that, we just throw up a Hail Mary and somehow God's going to work things out the way that I want. But rather it's part of knowing my own limitations, recognizing what I am able to do and recognizing what I'm not able to do.
Yeah.
One thing that I am able to do is, when things can seem anxious to me or worrisome, when I don't know how things will end. Yeah. And I think that's a pretty common thing for people, is the unknown causes anxiety. And we're finite in our knowledge. So there are many things that we do not know. But if I allow that to be my point of anxiety, every day would be a mountain of overwhelming sensation. And so I am limited in what I can actually know about things going on. But what I can do is take that to God in prayer. So thinking of, 1 Peter 5:7, where it talks about casting your anxiety before God, and Philippians 4:6 talking about, cast your anxious thoughts before him, take your anxious thoughts before him in prayer, with supplication and with thanksgiving. Make your request known to him. And it's that sense of, through faith, I have that closeness with a sovereign being, the God who has created me, created this world around me. And he did not place me here for a sadistic reason of watching me struggle, but rather for placing or creating me with my own value that he's given me when he created me, just like anyone else, with my own skill set, which comes with its own capabilities and limitations.
Yes.
And so when I am functioning to my fullest capacity or ability, that means I'm doing things in a healthy way. I'm also have the opportunity to glorify God. And if that's the case, then man, I can rest that with him. Rest in that, knowing that my anxiety isn't going to bring about another ounce of ability, but I can leave that with God, who is in full control of my daily life. Doesn't mean I just drop it and say, hey, here are my terms, meet me. And it doesn't mean I just drop it and forget about, but I can rest that and trust that God's going to work about this in a way that's in his timing, and it's best for him. And it's the best for me as well, despite whether I think I know or not.
Oh many
So
times
prayer is something I can do that.
is that where we are? We're
Yeah.
there, you know. We've done all the things that we know to do, and you know, we just trust that our good God has that in mind, and we get such comfort going to him knowing that he knows all the pieces that we can't know.
Yeah.
That's good. And it makes me think about your line in there about worrying, you know, like we all have a propensity to worry, but truly that doesn't bring about any solution. And really it just stirs up in us emotionally and even physically stressors that are actually taking us away from de-escalating and making peace with our God who's in control of the situation and the situation itself. So
Yeah.
it's always, I think that's always a good reminder about the lack of help that worrying actually is.
Yeah. And I don't want to, Cassie, I don't want to confuse that with, you know, in a distant past, I'd even approached a counselor on a subject matter, and it was strictly dealing with a relationship. And I was basically just driven to the Bible and given a Bible lesson about who we are, who God is. And it really missed the mark of what I was even addressing. And so on one hand, I don't mean to misapply the fact that if you're hurting, people hurt, they have real hurts. They have real struggles. I don't mean to make it sound like, hey, pray harder, memorize more scripture, and all will be okay.
Yeah.
I don't mean that. I don't mean to err on that side. But what I do mean is a proper application of, man, what's outside of my control, I can trust is not outside of God's control. And that is where I can rest and be comforted in.
Yeah, that's really good. You talk about practical application also in your article, and you have 3 different things. I mean, obviously there are more, but you hit on these 3 main things: deep breathing, self-care, and making a list. So let's talk about each of those individually. So deep breathing, why do you recommend deep breathing? It seems so simple. So why is it so powerful?
Yeah. One, it's a very simple thing. 2, it's a very practical thing. And
easily accessible, right?
Yeah, that's right. Pretty much everywhere I've gone, I've noticed there's oxygen.
Yeah.
So I can do this. But what the point is behind deep breathing is when we're anxious, you know, we got some neurochemicals going on between our brain, down our brainstem, even into our heart that say pump faster. And what I want to do in my anxious moments is I don't want to feed that. I don't want to rev my engine up, spinning my tires out, and just, excuse me, overheat and collapse from
flinging mud everywhere.
Working so hard, you know, at high RPMs, because that's what I tell myself ought to be done. But in actuality, I need to slow down. And so what deep breathing does is just allow me to regulate my physics of my heart rate. And so what I'm doing in essence is through deep breathing is getting more oxygen rich breaths in, which gives me more oxygen rich blood. And when I have that, my heart doesn't have to beat as fast in order to get to supply my body with the oxygen. And so it kind of tells my brain a counteraction that says, okay, we can slow down.
Yeah.
And so, because when I get done, I run a sprint or I go for a jog, hypothetically, if I were to go on a jog at some point.
Hypothetically.
I would come back from my jog and my heart would be pounding because my muscles are fatigued. I need to get oxygen through them. I'm ready. It's what was needed when I was exerting energy.
Yes.
And so likewise, in order to bring my heart rate down, when I'm not exercising but I'm feeling anxious, is do some deep breathing. And proper way of doing that is just, I don't want to use my shoulders because that just stressed me. There's actually, when people get stressed out or anxious,
I feel like I just need to.
yeah, I mean, we notice it in our body. And if
Yeah.
we don't, we need to take notice of, where am I feeling stressed out? It's often in shoulders, neck, sometimes our chest, sometimes our arms, and even in our face. So what I want to do is just, this doesn't have to be an exercise where people know you're doing. You don't have to unroll the yoga mat at the office, and so people know that you're doing.
Guys, I gotta do some deep breathing. I'm feeling anxious.
Right. So what I can do is just simply sit in my chair, whether I'm at office or at home, in relaxed position. I'm not sitting arms crossed. I'm relaxed, and I actually want to use my diaphragm muscle in my abdomen to expand the air capacity. And so I do something like I wrote in there, simple as breathing in through my nose, using my diaphragm for 3 or 4 seconds, holding it, and slowly breathing out through my mouth for the same amount of time.
Yeah.
So, and I do that for about 5 reps each, breathing in, holding, and breathing out. I'll use my diaphragm while I'm sitting up, because then I'm able to look and say afterwards, I kind of do a comparison, and I feel like, how do I feel now? Is my heart rate going down?
Do I need to do some more repetition?
Yeah. Or do I feel like my shoulders are actually relaxing a little bit?
Yeah.
And when I do that, that gives me, that the biophysics of oxygenated, rich blood, and my heart rate slows down. But it does another important thing. It also allows me to put some time in between my anxious thinking and the ability to, let's think about what's a practical, tangible next best step.
Yeah, that's good.
Because when I'm amped up on emotions, I tend not to make the best decisions when I'm up here emotionally.
Right.
And I haven't met people who have really done that either. We can either cut out emotions and be purely logical, or we have to realize that things need to be a little bit more balanced. So, that might be a long answer there, Cassie, but that's really the importance and
really
simplicity. Yeah, the simplicity of deep breathing.
Yeah, and I love how you mentioned the balance, because I do think that is so important. It's not good to just be purely logical and not allow ourselves to engage our emotions either. We just have to strike that balance. And as we mature in life, hopefully we're getting better and better at that.
That's right. And that might even feed into that second point that's made of that you were asking about, as far as dealing with my emotions. It is important because, like I said at the beginning, if I am just worrying about anxiety, the symptoms that are emitting an anxiety, I may not be aware of what's going on underneath that within myself. Am I feeling anxious based on, the certain relationship with a certain person? It seems tumultuous, or it seems unsteady, uncertain. Maybe there's fear in that for me. Maybe underneath there is fear that I have about, man, what if I can't make this work? What if somehow this reflects poorly on me and I don't like that? None of us like to think that we've caused a negative outcome, or that none of us like to think that we are incapable of doing something that we want.
Yes.
And so what we often do is tend to skip that, and we don't focus on what our emotions are that are going on behind the scenes. Instead, we just want to say, here's anxiety. I want this to go away.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do that if we don't examine what are some emotions that are really conflicting within me.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's an important important step for us to do, is see what's something maybe subsurface that's going on here.
Yeah, that's really good. Your second practical point that you get to, that you're talking about as people are working through their anxiety, is self-care. So what are some examples of self-care? It's going to be different for everybody. Everybody's
Yeah.
got their own brand, just like we're all individuals, their own brand, their own things that truly help them feel cared for, that they are responsible for in and of themselves. So talk about some examples of that besides sleep.
Sure. I think looking at health in a holistic way, I'm identify 4 factors, components of holistic health, and that is, physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally.
Yeah.
Physically, obviously, it's important that we get proper amount of sleep. It's important that we get good exercise, and it's important that we eat well. There's always some ebb and flow in any of those components, but it's important that overall we're striving with a healthy trend rather than a.
Taking care of the temple that God gave us.
That's right. And so that's physical. Mental is, man, are we staying, even if it's things like, am I reading for enjoyment? Am I learning? What things am I pursuing that I'm gaining? Maybe it's a new skill set. Maybe it's just pursuing a hobby that I enjoy doing, that's learning how to do something tangible. Like I'm learning to take an art class.
Videos.
Yeah. Learning this new whole technology gadgety thing. This is weird. Yeah. And then, spiritually, my holistic health spiritually is, am I in God's word? Am I reading the Bible regularly? Because if that's my source of truth, that as the source of truth is important for me to know.
Yes.
Am I in prayer? That's the way that I communicate with God, even though God knows me and knows my thoughts. It's my way of communicating with God. And that's also an act of my submitting an authority to him.
Yeah.
So those are important. Spiritually, how am I involved in my faith community at church or with those people from church?
Yeah.
And serving alongside them, even in my community. The third thing would be,
you're on the fourth.
Okay. All right. then lastly,
I got 2 more. What?
Then the last one would be emotions. And that is more often than not probably the one that people tend to neglect. And self-care in any of these 4 arenas is very important. Yeah. And self-care with emotions looks like, am I willing to recognize what's going on inside of me? Am I willing to recognize those feelings that I'm having when I have interactions with this person? Man, maybe it's negative. Maybe I'm having negative responses based on this person's reactions with me. Yeah. Or am I having good reactions? Am I happy with this person? It does not mean that I like the interactions, but what's important about self-care is that I am aware of the interactions, of the feelings that I'm having. Because if I can
feel the feelings, even if you don't like them, even if you don't think they're good, that doesn't make you a bad person to experience things. Or
right, absolutely not. In fact, the point that was mentioned earlier is feelings are really just a reaction to what's going on. They're like a signal. Okay. It's like a self signal to yourself. And maybe you've heard me say before that, like, emotions are not right or wrong. They just are.
Yeah.
And so if I am aware enough and self-caring enough to be aware of what's going on inside of me, I'm not judging myself based on what I'm feeling or not feeling. I'm just aware of what is going on inside of me. And that's important, because if I don't know what's going on inside of me, I can't really address that issue in a healthy way at all.
Yeah, that's really good. So the last thing that you talk about is making a list. So talk through the practicalities of how making a list is helpful and what that looks like.
Sure. This really isn't to say, hey, let's bypass the bypass the. Hey, I've got kids. I'm at home, so.
All right. Yes. Go ahead.
Um,
I was so close. I was so close.
So close. So
I
close.
was given the sign, and that was a no. So, anyway, let's talk about the list.
So this is something where it doesn't say someone gets to bypass looking at emotions and, hey, let me just focus on making a list and doing, because that can often be a real temptation to say, you know what, I don't like how certain feelings are coming up when I'm trying to think about the situation. So I'm just going to shelve those and make a list, and I'll just do, because that's what I know how.
Sometimes on my list is journaling to get to those feelings, to deal with those feelings.
That's great. Then I'd say that's a healthy list.
Crossover of the middle, the number 2 and number 3.
Yeah. So, but the point of making a list is, I'll give an example. Is my wife's a high capacity person. I am not, but my wife is, and she has, not only as a mom, but as a professional woman in business, and she has about 2 or 3 different things always going on for work, with different clients that she serves, and she has the responsibility of our family as we interact as husband and wife, and responsibility of family as she interacts with as children and mom. And there are always things going on, and it's like the mental load is overwhelming. And I like that word picture of mental load, because I think especially for women, it's constant. There's never like a break in a day where you're stop thinking. So I'm told.
Like you're shooting a video.
So that's right. So for me, I can typically silo and compartmentalize my thinking. But for my wife, she has so much going on that she started to feel anxiety, and she started to feel overwhelmed of what's going on. So what we did one time was just simply talk through. I had her make a list of what is everything that she feels is on the forefront, the front burner for her to get done. We went through that. We compartmentalized it. I said, make a list for your work responsibilities, make a list for family responsibilities, make a list for what your social commitments, responsibilities were. And we went through
pages later.
Oh my goodness. It was literally like a half hour later, I came back and I was like, so are you done yet? Because I was going to follow up with it. She's like, no, I'm not. I'm still working. I said, oh, okay. Like I was thinking 5 things.
Pencil down. I wasn't like having a snack in the middle,
Like that would be me. But I was literally blown away because I was like, I was thinking like 5 things.
Yeah.
But the point in that was simply after we went through that, we were able to say, okay, what is in your control to do? What is something that you want to see these outcomes? And these are some goals you might have for work, but you alone, do you have the sole capacity to change this or not? And the ones that were like, I don't. I guess it's not on my shoulders because it's not able to be on my shoulders solely.
Which is so freeing.
Yeah. So what we did is literally went through, and she was crossing that off. She's like, oh, okay. So what we did is we shrunk her list of, I don't know how many, several things, down to probably about a third of the size. That was her mental load. And that mental load that is always swirling around inside of her head. And when someone feels anxious, they have a mental load that is heavy. And compare it to like, how many clowns in the car can you get? Right. It's like, I don't need this many clowns in the car. So you just want to try and get rid of the excess mental load by making a list.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you are now controlling things. It means you're now just recognizing what is within your control.
Yeah.
So it goes hand in hand with knowing your limits and being aware of your own emotional baggage that's in a moment. And when you realize that, we say, okay, what's something that we can do?
Yeah.
And we realize what we can do, we list it out in priority and we say, highest priority, this is going to be my next step.
Yeah.
It doesn't say I'm taking all control. In fact, it still fits in with the mode of praying and giving it to God. It fits in the mode with, hey, I'm realizing what's going on with me emotionally.
Yeah.
I've processed it and I'm realizing that I can't neglect that. And it's also fitting in within knowing my limits. I can't do everything on my list. Here's what I can do. And that helps alleviate this constant barrage of pressure.
And I love too that you talked about having permission, giving yourself permission to cross off things, even that are within your control, that really are not the priority. You know, like maybe I do need a haircut. Maybe I don't really need a haircut. Like, how important is that really? Or mowing the grass. Like, okay, I mowed the grass last weekend. Do I absolutely have to mow the grass, or can I create space for something else?
Right.
So I thought that was really freeing. Really good. This has all been
And
really good.
sometimes it's just, sometimes we overcommit too, especially in the social arena. And we put that pressure on, like you said, pressure on ourselves. And we say, hey, I told so-and-so, like, we really need to get together this weekend. It might be good motivation and good reason to, but if I realize that, you know what, it's not healthy for me to be putting this pressure on myself. That's good awareness too. Like, we can cut back on the things that we might say we have to be doing.
Yeah.
That's part of good self-care.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This has been so good, so practical. So thanks for meeting with me to chat about this article. And if you have enjoyed this article, Jessie has other great articles up at MyCounselor.Online. So thanks for chatting with me, Jessie, and I look forward to our next meeting.